So I'm going to start by introducing our first panelist, who is Jared Moore. And Jared works on making AI systems do the right thing. He's a PhD student at Stanford University's Department of Computer Science. And before that, he was a lecturer at the University of Washington School of Computer Science, where he made and taught well-reviewed courses on computer ethics and the philosophy of AI. His satirical novel about AI, The Strength of the Illusion, came out in September 2023. And so I will turn it over to Jared.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm today going to talk a little bit about what is AI and then move into some of the philosophical issues as it pertains to the discussion tonight. I understand I have 10 minutes, so I have a little timer here. Actually follow that. People mean a lot of different things when they use the term AI. It's been used since a conference that happened in the 1950s at Dartmouth. And since then, a panoply of different technologies have fallen under the term, from more like logic-based flow charts to lines of best fit, like linear regression, as you may have done in math class, to the harder to understand, more prominent AI systems that we have today built on machine learning, these neural networks. There have been a variety of issues as it pertains to the challenges that AI brings up over the years. People have been commenting on what it means for human intelligence to be, threatened in a sense, or for there to be other alternatives. Back in the 80s, when people like Dan Dennett and Doug Hofstadter were blowing the whistle about AI, to the contrary of other people like some other scholars. Chess was a big deal. People thought that if computers could play chess, this would mean that they would understand in a very general sense. This happened in 1997. A computer made by IBM, Deep Blue, beat Garry Kasparov, this leading chess player, and it was a huge event in the AI history, but it didn't do as much as people would have thought. It ended up being the case that the underlying technology, in order to learn how to play chess, basically imagining the move that your next player is going to take, there was just a lot of speed ups that happened. There was this guy that you will have heard of if you've taken computer science classes, Moore, after the eponymously named Moore's Law. He was an employee at IBM, and he predicted they were seeing that the number of transistors that they could fit on computer chips in the 1960s was doubling about every 1.6 years. They were getting faster, and they were staying the same size, more or less. And this has continued today. This is why back in the 1950s, computers used to be the size of entire rooms, but now we have much more powerful computers sitting in our watches or in our smart fridge or whatever it is. So there's a bit of a undercurrent to a lot of the developments in AI, in which the theoretical developments that have allowed for playing chess, writing in natural human language, is probably what we're thinking of. Services like ChatGPT, large language models. All of the theory has existed for many decades. The difference is computers are much, much, much faster today. And they have lots and lots of data. So after the 70s and 80s, focus on a lot more of these logic-based flowcharts, in the 90s and into the aughts, we saw the rise of machine learning, which you've probably heard of, which was a more statistical-based approach, more similar to linear regression. They used a different kind of curve, logistic curves, and a variety of other methods along these lines. And these methods really took off because, as you remember, for plotting a line of best fit, what you're trying to do is figure out where the trend of all of those points are. When Google came online, AOL was online, there was a sense of being online. a lot more data was starting to be collected, and this allowed us to, in a much higher dimensional space than just two, as you would imagine a plane being, plot uh, these sorts of functions. And this was the kind of bedrock of machine learning. It was on top of this that neural networks, which again had been around since 1970, although parodied and sort of lambasted in Seymour Papert's and Marvin Minsky's book Perceptrons, started to really work. They had been the laughingstock of the AI community for the longest time. Yann LeCun, who won the Turing Award as with Hinton and Bengio a couple of years ago, which is effectively the Nobel Prize of computer science. He was, nobody liked him back in the 80s and in the 90s. And so this is when we really saw neural networks, which are like distributed linked nodes with differently weighted edges. Hard for me to describe the exact mathematics without giving some figures there. Then they took off. And the current AI technology that we see today is very similar. There are, some speed ups, some changes along the edges, differences in what you can put in and the kinds of things that you can pull out. But there has not been anything fundamentally that different in the past decade. So I'm going to return a little bit to the what people think about AI and then dive into a little more of the philosophical issues. Because AI refers to all of these different technologies, it's hard to get a handle on. In a sense, part of this is purposeful. The people that are calling things AI are coming from where I am in Silicon Valley, trying to get venture capitalist money to fund what they're doing and grow somebody, I can't remember who, said that AI is, it's the next frontier. It's the kind of technology that we don't quite have perfected yet. What was AI 10 or 20 years ago, we no longer think of as so special. So Yann LeCun, who I just mentioned, in the early 90s was working on optical character recognition, OCR, the technology that the US Post Office began to use to be able to read the address that you had written on an envelope. But some of us have probably heard of the fact that the USPS, at least in the United States, other post services elsewhere, can figure out what you have written down. That doesn't seem so foreign or so challenging for what it means to be human, for example. Anyway, a variety of issues have come up as it pertains to artificial intelligence. At the moment, with models such as ChatGPT, people think about whether they truly understand language. Is there anything special that humans are doing when we string words together? Is that merely computations on a computer? Notions of consciousness, of intentionality, all of these are mixed into the bag and can be pulled one way or another, depending on how you read the current information. There have been other issues that have cropped up in the past. For a long time, AI was used as a sort of thought experiment for theory of mind, the subdiscipline in philosophy. Could we imagine a system that does so and so? This is reasonable, although I'm one to criticize thought experiments that move us too far away from current reality. So I'm happy to get into why that is exactly in questions. But what I am particularly interested in when I think about AI technology today, one, the displacement of work, what it means to be creative. I wrote a novel about artificial intelligence. I care about writing. It's something that I view as important. How is that challenged, strengthened, et cetera, when we think about other systems that are able to do it similarly, perhaps not the same as we are. And then as it pertains to my research that I do, I really think about the social and the moral uses of artificial intelligence. can you have a system which figures out the right thing to do, that is able to navigate social norms and mores? As children, these are skills that we develop. This is sort of what differentiates us, as many developmental and comparative psychologists describe, from other species. Does ChatGPT have these same skills? Is it reasoning morally? That's a question I'm going to have to leave you with, because I'm at 10 minutes. But thank you.
Thanks, Jared. It's very provocative. Our next speaker is Erica Bigelow, who is a PLATO facilitator. She's currently teaching our high school class on issues involved in AI, and she's a PhD student in philosophy at the University of Washington, whose work focuses on disability, emotion, injustice, and the ways these play out, particularly across digital media. She's committed to expanding access to philosophy and to helping students see the value of philosophical thinking in their everyday lives. So I'll turn it over to Erica.
Thank you. And thanks, Jared. I'm hoping that my Wi-Fi doesn't get too laggy. I'm currently at a hotel for a philosophy conference, which among all of the great conversations happening also means a whole bunch of devices connected to the same Wi-Fi network. So that could slow things down a bit. But as Jana said, I've been facilitating a class for the last few weeks with a really just brilliant, amazing, wonderful group of high schoolers. And one of the things that I've come to realize, because the topic of this class is AI and tech ethics, is that I don't really know that much about AI or about technology. I asked recently one of my students, just to kind of get us all, on the same page at the start of a discussion, if someone could, give us a basic explanation of what AI actually is and how it works. Even asking that question might have been an error. But we've received a brilliant explanation that was way above my level of understanding. So then I had to kind of rephrase it and say, okay, let's imagine that there's another 15 students in this Zoom with us, but they're all in kindergarten and they want to know how AI works. Can you put it at that level for me? And they did, and they did a really great job with it. One of the things that I have kind of come to notice as what seems like the AI fad or the AI hysteria almost has risen to the top of academic discourse is that there often doesn't seem to be a super clear sense of what it is that we're talking about. And by that, I mean, there doesn't seem to be a super clear sense of what AI can and cannot actually do. And this is something that I've been thinking through in my own kind of practice as an instructor, both in pre-college classes and also, of course, in university classes where I'm asked to grade students. I'm asking them to submit written work and things like that. So because it seems like we don't have a super super understanding maybe of what AI can do, I've been trying to think of ways to kind of design assignments or class activities and things like that that can maybe help us get a little bit closer to an answer on that question. And one activity that was designed by Stephen Miller at Rainier Beach High School in Seattle, which is the school where I am currently a philosopher in residence, is something that he called Human versus Machine. It has like that fun kind of sci-fi-ish snappy title. So immediately when, we told the students, hey, we're going to be doing human versus machine today, they were like, all right, we're in, say no more. And what we ended up doing was replicating one of their IB or International Baccalaureate assignments. So for those of you who are not familiar with the IB curriculum, as I was not familiar with it prior to starting at Rainier Beach, one of their assignments involves what's called an exhibition. So they're given this list of knowledge questions to choose from, And they have to essentially choose an image to kind of symbolize or represent an answer to that knowledge question. And the knowledge questions, there's a huge range of them, right? They range from things like, I don't think any of these are actually verbatim, but things like, how does the culture that you're raised in impact what you know? How does your social position impact what you know? Things like that. So in the assignment that Stephen designed, we had students basically within small groups coming up with two versions of a response to the same question. The only catch was one of those responses needed to be fully written by them. The other response needed to be fully AI generated. So they could ask the AI to, I think most of them were using ChatGPT. They could ask it to refine its answer as many times as they wanted. They could ask it to refine its answer in whatever ways they wanted. But ultimately, their task was to try and make this AI response so good and so real and so human sounding that they could actually fool their classmates. We ended up kind of gamifying it a little bit and making it into a competition where students were, so each group, like I said, had two responses, one human, one AI, and students were competing to see which group could fool the most of their classmates, which group could get the most of their classmates to identify their human written one as AI written, or vice versa. And what we ended up finding was that, on the one hand, it took a ton of revision and a ton of tweaking and a ton of, can you restate that in the first person? Can you restate that and, start with an I feel sentence to get the AI one to seem remotely human? And on the other hand, students found that they were kind of needing to manipulate their own writing in ways that they didn't really like that much in order to try and make the one that was human written feel more AI written. A lot of the conversations that I heard among students kind of within the same group were something along the lines of, no, that's too good. That sounds too human. So I think that this assignment is really valuable, and I'm already kind of trying to plot ways that I can work it into my courses at the University of Washington, because I think that it kind of gives students a more realistic sense of, here's this AI tool. Maybe it can do something pretty good. Maybe it can, write a not too bad paragraph, but there's something missing. There's something that you can do that this technology cannot yet replicate. And of course, a lot is kind of hinging on the word yet. But at least for the meantime, students kind of came away from it with the sense that AI is super intelligent. That's like the I of AI, but it's not us. It's not who we are. That's not, who we are is not reducible to whatever algorithms are behind GPT. And finally, kind of from the instructor perspective, I think that it was also really, really helpful to kind of quell some of my own fears about AI generated work. As I said, I've kind of always had this worry, or for the last couple of years, when I assign and receive written work at the university, had this concern about are my students using ChatGPT and I just don't know it? And it, in a kind of strange sense, made me a little bit more confident, I think, in my own ability to pick out AI generated work, and in my own ability to look at, a few paragraphs of text where you're asking students to answer questions that involve a lot of reflection and things like that, and to say, I don't think a human wrote this, even with students who, I know fairly well, having been with this particular group since September, at least once a week, but I don't know them quite well enough that, I think I could look at an anonymized group of paragraphs and say, okay, you wrote this, you wrote this, you wrote this. I can tell your writing styles. So that is one of the ways that we've been kind of implementing AI in kind of unique, I think, creative ways in the high school classroom.
Thank you, Erica. I'm going to turn it over now to Chloe Chun. Chloe is a member of Plato's Student Advisory Council, which is made up of high school students around the country. And she's a student at Xavier College Preparatory in Arizona. Chloe enjoys reading and studying Kantian literature and postmodernism, and outside of philosophy, she enjoys practicing Korean calligraphy and industrial design.
Hello. It's gonna be really fun. You just listened to two really smart people with PhDs, and now you're gonna listen to someone without a high school degree. I want to see if I can try to share my screen. Okay. So this summit really fits into what I just heard before because this was a fun idea I came up with my friends. Basically, we were looking online through example college admissions essays, and there's this like unspoken understanding when we were peer reviewing that, oh, like she definitely used ChatGPT to write this essay. And so before around 2 years ago, when my friends and I really started studying philosophy for fun, I felt like we had a really superficial understanding, which basically meant that, like, if there is anything online or on Reddit, we would basically say, oh, yeah, that's totally right. So my idea was to take this really short, kind of quippy introduction I wrote for this essay prompt and put the exact same prompt in ChatGPT and Bard to see if I could tell the difference. And these were 3 versions that came out. So I want to see if you can tell which one was written by a human. I think I'm not sure if everyone got through all of them, but the answer was version 2. Version 1 was generated by ChatGPT, and version 3 was generated by Bard. Um, so I'm not sure if people were able to tell the difference, but at least to me, superficially, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference, even though I wrote one of them around 2 years ago. But this really made me curious about, what's the value of like structured writing lessons and classes within English class. And of course, I found out about this after I finished my admissions, but apparently I'm not the only one who thinks about that. Several of the universities, like Duke or the University of Maryland, no longer considers the quality of essay writing in their admissions. And I talked to my English teachers, and I found that a lot of their assignments are no longer about just teaching us how to write Jane Schaefer assignments or teaching us how to write a 5-paragraph essay, but more about comparing two pieces of literature. And so this made me curious about what should English classes be structured around once AI gets to the point where it's consumed enough literature online that it can correctly copy a very like human style of tone. And I think that rather than focus on traditional essays, it would be more valuable, at least on my perspective as someone in high school, to focus on either more prose related topics or purely assignments that allowed us to like edit essays as well. And this is really reflective and generally what I've seen not only in my own school, where our English teachers like literally give us one really long poem and tell us to underline things we find interesting, or two different poems or two different essays and tell us what the deeper understandings of it is. And as AI becomes more sophisticated, the ability to write a structurally sound essay with, say, flawless grammar will eventually become less valuable. And thus, the emphasis will probably move to more delivery and the ability to use language and connect with an audience, not only like using just concrete facts, but also with the incorporation of transition phrases. And I think this could make English classes a little bit more engaging because at least when we were learning Jane Cheever, it all seemed relatively regimented, and the majority of English class, especially those classes such as like either writing lab reports for biology or even AP Lang or AP Lit, or even writing DBQs in APUSH, they all seem very, very busy, like busy work oriented, and most of the times it seems generally relatively useless, especially because some people, I don't know if I do it, but a lot of my friends usually just use ChatGPT and Bard to summarize documents and then put it on the essay. So I think with the increasing presence of AI, not only maybe admissions, but also assignments should be geared not only to content, but focus on the power of rhetoric and delivery. But yeah.
Thanks, Chloe. Our final speaker is Cassie Finley, who is Plato's communications director, and she is a PhD candidate in philosophy at the University of Iowa and the director of the Iowa Lyceum, a free pre-college philosophy summer program run by University of Iowa graduate students. She's published on the Iowa Lyceum and on graduate student education, and she has current projects in public and pre-college philosophy in the works. She also developed with Jen Foster from USC the free public philosophy workshop series Cogtuito. Her research interests include virtue education, metaphilosophy, social epistemology, ancient Greek philosophy, and the philosophy of technology. Thanks, Cassie.
Thank you, Jana, and thank you to everyone for being here and to my fellow panelists. Happy to be a part of this. I'm gonna share my screen real quickly here. Good. Everyone can see? Excellent. So I wanted to bring this, hopefully wrap this up nicely in discussing a little bit of the role of philosophical dialogue and education in the context of AI. I think I'm going to talk about it mostly in terms of middle and high school philosophy contexts, but I think this applies also to higher education and potentially beyond philosophy, because as I think most of us are aware, especially in the context of education, AI is increasingly a prevalent problem. I think ChatGPT and Bard are some of the most prevalent issues in trying to get students to care, basically, to do the work, right? So it seems like the basis of this question of how we should interact with ChatGPT and other forms of AI depends on the assumption that ChatGPT can do a lot of the things just as well, if not better than what human beings can do. I think this is especially poignant for students who are still working on just writing grammatically correct sentences or expressing their ideas in as concise of ways as they can. And so when they can ask ChatGPT to give them the answer to something, or if they can give ChatGPT some sort of jumble of ideas that they have, and ChatGPT can make it all nice and pretty, and they can submit that instead, it's difficult to think, even for the most well-intentioned students, why they wouldn't do something like that. After all, so often they are really concerned with getting a good grade on their assignments, with impressing their teachers, making sure their parents are seeing that they're doing good work. But I think what this instead shows is that we need to have more and more conversations with students about what ChatGPT is, conversations about not only how the technology works and its limitations with it, but also when the students feel like it should be used, when it shouldn't be used. And of course, I think implicit throughout this is, I take it these are all philosophical conversations that you would be engaging the students in. But I mean, I coach a middle school ethics bowl team online each week, and one of the questions that we've been discussing is the role of AI in classrooms. And it's remarkable to hear these 12-year-old students talking about how ChatGPT has influenced their views about education, and they're using technology that I haven't even heard of on a daily basis because it helps them take notes. It helps them to learn and understand things. So they see it very much as continuous with their everyday lives. So having these conversations with the students about what they're coming into the classroom with, assuming that ChatGPT can do, what they think that it should do, I think can bring the conversation even further into having these discussions at even earlier ages about what the value of education is or what the point of their education is. I think this is often not something that's discussed at all in K through 12, but even rarely in higher education. What is the point of learning this historical information in history classes or studying math if it doesn't teach how to do taxes and things like that? Why do that? And it's just all that more salient that we need to have these conversations about the value of education now that ChatGPT is in place, because ChatGPT is subverting the motivations and kind of assumptions about the value of education up until now. So I think that we can think of ChatGPT and students' relation to ChatGPT as an opportunity for engaging students in dialogue and reflection, I think as Erica and others have said, in part too, because they're already really interested in talking about AI and in these conversations. They're motivated in all sorts of different ways to have these conversations. I think it's a great opportunity to start having some of these higher level conversations about students' relationship to their homework and their education more broadly. So I think that's to say that all of these issues that we as parents and teachers and professors and the public are facing and wondering about in this age of AI is really an opportunity to include young people in these conversations, to hear how it's influencing the way that they see the world. And I think most importantly, we need to have conversations with young people to ensure that they're learning to value themselves as thinkers. Now that middle schoolers and high schoolers can just have ChatGPT write down a bunch of their thoughts for them, it's really hard for them to feel like anything they say is valuable unless it's really perfectly well done. And this was something I teach online middle school philosophy classes, and after a few weeks of a philosophy class, I actually had the students ask ChatGPT a bunch of the questions that we'd been discussing. And at first, they were all deeply disturbed by how eloquent ChatGPT's responses were, that a student even said explicitly, "I could never write anything that good." And then after a little bit of dialogue about the answers and asking really, what is ChatGPT saying in this answer, they realized that actually, no, it looked kind of nice, but in terms of content, ChatGPT really didn't say much. So I think that was a place where the students felt that much more as learners and as thinkers, because they realized that actually, even though they may not have the vocabulary or they may not be really strong writers yet, they can still have something worth saying in ways that ChatGPT doesn't. I think that this brings into these conversations the questions about how students see themselves. And this, I think, fits pretty nicely with some of what Chloe said, is that if we think about education as a process of transformation and of self-discovery and self-improvement, then that helps students to reflect on like what sort of person they want to be and how they can be intentional about how they're using ChatGPT instead of feeling like they have to use ChatGPT to get a good grade or something like that. I think this brings us to more specifically, maybe the role of philosophy in some of this. So I think all of these constitute philosophical dialogue, all of these interactions with students about their role and relationship and understanding of AI. But I think the other fun part here is because students are really engaged with questions about ChatGPT, but also AI in more of the general artificial intelligence, like conscious machine sort of sense, is that there are a lot of questions that students at the age of 8 or 9 or 10 are already aware of in the context of AI that are really just particular versions of other more like other philosophical questions that you might see or discuss in an intro to philosophy class in a university setting. So building from learning to value themselves as thinkers, then I think that we can get to the point where we're also helping students to see the value of education more generally, and also the value of philosophy in these contexts. So just a couple of points here. I mean, there are tons of ways to connect some of these ideas. I know Jared said a lot of different ways that these connect, but we can think about in sort of traditional philosophy branches of metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. We can just start with these questions of what is AI? What are we talking about? What does it mean for something to be intelligent or artificially intelligent? What does it mean for something to be conscious? And how is consciousness related to bodies? Could something be a conscious machine, or could it feel pain if it doesn't have a body in some sense? Questions about free will and determinism come up really quickly and I think connect pretty immediately. So these kind of initial questions that students already have are really nice gateways to having these really rich philosophical discussions with them about metaphysics, which then in turn, right, questions about what is consciousness. We can also ask, how do we know if something's conscious? Not only AI, but how do I know I'm conscious? How do I know something else is conscious? Other people, how do we know they're conscious? And I think related even to ChatGPT, regardless of these consciousness questions, the important point about understanding some of how these technologies work can help, I think, students be more intentional in recognizing the like epistemic risks of using ChatGPT. Like, if you use ChatGPT as Google, there are risks with getting lots of bad information from these sorts of things. And that, I mean, kids probably aren't as concerned about this, but I think a lot of adults are really concerned about misinformation. And if we're concerned about misinformation and still relying on ChatGPT to give us a lot of information, then how does that relate to our values about what it means to know how to exist in the world? And then ethical questions, right? I think students really get excited about robot rights, and if AI is conscious, if ChatGPT is conscious, then how should we treat it? Is it okay to call ChatGPT bad names? How does that relate to how we should treat each other? And also questions about like the ethics of AI art. I've had a lot of my middle school students really interested in questions because they love using DALL-E and all of these generative art programs. And it doesn't take long before they start coming across articles or stories about how these programs are trained on real artists' work without any credit. So it is like taking and changing other people's art without any credit or anything like that. So all sorts of conversations about AI can be really, really rich for getting students excited about kind of philosophical questions that people have been asking about for thousands of years. It'd be a great, like a gateway into even more traditional philosophical conversations. So that's to say, I think that we end up having a feedback loop of the more that we have conversations with students at any age of learning to value themselves as thinkers, that contributes to them valuing philosophy and seeing how important their education is, and then valuing philosophy and education helps them to reinforce their own value in learning about the world and asking questions and being curious and developing into civil citizens who care about one another. I think that although there are a lot of concerns and stressors about how ChatGPT is changing education and how students are overly relying on it, I think on the flip side, there's now a lot more reason to talk to students about how AI and ChatGPT fit into their lives. And by talking about how ChatGPT and AI fit into their lives, that helps them to like that helps introduce them into these philosophical spaces. So thank you very much, and look forward to all of your thoughts.
Thank you, Cassie. So as I had said early on, if other people have questions, please put them in the chat, or you can raise hands. I'm going to start though by just asking the panel of something I've been thinking about as I've been listening to you all. All of you talked a little bit about how ChatGPT is not like us, is not like a human. I think Erica said that explicitly. But all of you touched on that. And in some ways, I think all of you touched on this question that Jared raised at the beginning about creativity. Can AI be creative like a human can be creative? What does it mean to be creative? And is this in some ways at the heart of how we should think about both the limits and the possibilities and the challenges of AI? So I'll just open that up to all four of you.
I think it's a really important question. This is something that came up a little bit in my AI and tech ethics class last night, actually, because we were asking about kind of what we think creativity is in the first place, right? If you think that creativity is just like recombining kind of existing resources or existing templates, then maybe AI can be creative if it's just like recombining or compositing. I don't think that's a word, but like putting together all of these things that already exist. Then maybe AI could be creative, but it seems like the kind of instinctive response that I was getting from a lot of students was that there's still something more to creativity. Like creativity is something more than just I keep using the word recombining, but recombining elements that already exist, right? They seem to have the impression that there needs to be something being added. We don't really know exactly what that something is, but they all seemed pretty firmly in the camp that AI cannot be creative. And I think I'm in that camp as well. But I'm not positive.
I'm happy to answer as well. I don't think there's as much to creativity as people give it credit for. I like being creative. Don't get me wrong. I like puzzles, writing, parodies, etc. But I feel like artists as a whole, you know, that there's this panache of authority that is given to them that we must really revere them. There's the mystery that is held toward the craft as well, which I just don't really think is how it actually goes. There's a lot of boredom and pulling at hairs and recognizing that some previous thing matched. And yeah, I think that AI systems could do that. But you can also say, you know, other natural processes could be creative as well. So yeah, I would say, but I also don't think creativity is the essential issue. So I wouldn't die on this point.
I think I can speak maybe to the spirit of the question because I'm not sure about creativity. I think that's really hard, but sort of also to the question of how do I instill confidence in students to get them to write without the use of AI? I think part of the framing that I think about all of this through is that the value of education isn't just in terms of knowing certain information or in creating something completely new that's never been done, right? If a 10-year-old somehow were to rewrite on her own Othello by Shakespeare, right? Same words somehow, it would still be incredible and an incredible feat, regardless of the fact that it already exists. So I think that a big part of education and learning is the personal achievement dimension of it. And for students to use AI in various ways, I think diminishes the personal achievement element of it. And so I've had to have a couple of conversations with some of my especially excited students who will use ChatGPT to refine their thoughts, or they'll end up writing really similarly to ChatGPT and may or may not be using it. But that's because they think that that's what the point of learning is. It's what they think that I want from them. But really what I want is for them to try. And it's only through trying can you develop those skills and achieve things. And the fact that something might already exist or might have already been done doesn't diminish the value of the personal achievement of it. I think that maybe speaks to some of the creativity elements, but I think also goes to the flip side of it, that it doesn't have to be creative so long as it's yours and your achievement.
I want to move then to another question that came up. Emily asks that she's wondering all of your thoughts on how AI learns and the consequences of it learning from flawed data, because it's learning mostly from the internet, which is full of crap, sexist, racist, everythingist, and just wrong data. So I'd love to hear all of your thoughts about this. It's a great question.
I would say if anybody has seen Dan Carlin's sketch on the 7 words that you're not supposed to say, he goes through them all. It's pretty funny. As a kid, you don't learn them necessarily. Shit, blah blah blah. How is it that we're able to learn when it is appropriate and not appropriate to use the toxic content that we ourselves see? People see that stuff. Doesn't mean that we are necessarily flawed. So I think it's an incorrect premise to say necessarily because the data that the system sees is bad or toxic, that the system itself will inherit that trait. There are also some nice mathematical theorems which show you, for example, if you are if you don't look at any toxic content and you're moderating a social media site, for example, you don't want to have neo-Nazis on it. It's hard to detect neo-Nazis unless you have evidence of neo-Nazis. You need like a strong positive signal to be able to recognize that. That said, in practice, most of these theoretical bounds are not what current AI systems are doing, so they can spew a lot of garbage. So that's not great. And a variety of people are trying to fix those things, and I don't know how good of a job they're doing. This doesn't speak about, I have other comments about what it means to learn in a more general sense, but I'll let other folks say their piece.
I mean, it's controversial to say that algorithms are biased, unavoidably so. And those biases can be more or less harmful, reflecting more or less harmful beliefs, and can be oppressive in all sorts of different ways. And initially, I was doing technology ethics. Sorry about that background noise. Initially doing technology ethics as part of my dissertation and research, but so much of it I felt so disheartened by that that's what led me more towards doing philosophy of children and thinking about philosophy of education, because it feels like by the time we're trying to fix the algorithms or convince programmers or corporations that they should care about the intentional or unintentional consequences of their technologies, it's a bit too late, and there are too many incentive structures in place for them to just not be ethical. But I think on the flip side, the kind of takeaway is if we want our technologies and biases to be less sexist, racist, misogynistic, etc., then we should try and make people less sexist, racist, misogynistic, and all of that. And I mean, it's a feedback loop that as things happen on the internet and the algorithms are trained on that information, it makes people subtly more sexist, racist, misogynistic, etc. But we can the best we can do is try and get people to be more thoughtful and sensitive to these considerations and be more intentional about what they're putting into the world.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And it seems like it seems like maybe one of the kind of fundamental differences between AI and humans is our ability to evaluate ideas in a certain way, and also our ability to, our being humans, ability to kind of detect sometimes when things are being said without actually being said. We talk a lot about, the use of dog whistles, the use of plausible deniability, where you can say something with a really racist or sexist or otherist intention, but then you say it in such a way that if anybody calls you out on it, you can just say, whoa, 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 I didn't say anything about that. And it seems like, yeah, I feel like I have trouble envisioning how an AI system would respond well to things like that.
So there are a couple of questions here that I kind of want to direct first to Chloe. The first is Eric Kenyon notes that we tend to teach to test. Many current writing tests focus on things that AIs are good at. Chloe talked about the importance of rhetoric. I've started leaning hard into voice with my students. I'm wondering what people think we should start testing and measuring in, say, ELA classes. And then I'll just add Mark's question, Chloe, while you're thinking about that one. Regarding your point of focusing on rhetoric and delivery, will students who utilize AI to learn the main points of a reading miss experiencing the impact of reading great literature and poetry and experiencing the impact of them on one's humanity? It's one thing to have a definition and another thing to expand one's mind, heart, and understanding from the impact of processing and thinking about great thoughts. Are we learning for a grade to impress people with our presentation skills and to be more efficient? And this is sort of related to Cassie's point. Or do we learn for the sake of better understanding the human condition and being better people to each other?
On the first point, I'm not actually quite sure how ELA classes will have to adapt to focus on skills not easily done or solved by AI. I think people who design English classes should focus on skills that encourage students to use technology to augment traditional writing processes, but in an ethical manner that somewhat uses AI to kind of reshape the way we encounter essays as a whole. And I think it's hard to imagine what it looked like because I imagine when new calculators like the TI-84 or the TI-Inspire came out that can solve double integrals and derivatives with simple commands, I imagine there was some pushback with math teachers questioning on, oh, should we be teaching how to do basic integrals or basic derivatives? But as a response to that, have 2 levels of calculus classes and multiple like different tiers of math classes and more accessibility to take higher math even in high school. So I think there might be new tiered English classes similarly that focus specifically on tone, specifically on rhetoric, and specifically in basic skills in order to treat grammar and basic sentence structure as a stepping point and then going beyond what AI can solve at the stepping point. For the second question about the value of learning things from I think that could be beneficial because if I try to read just Shakespeare without it being translated to modern English, I'd have a really hard time with it. But that's why I buy like No Fear Shakespeare books, saying like, oh, I can understand vaguely the intentions and the story behind this complex language in a way that I can interpret myself. So I think using AI to approach larger and more complex subjects might be really beneficial if I have trouble understanding it in its original form.
I have something to add about teaching. I have been a lecturer for large university classes, some seminar based, some big math classes basically. What's convenient at the university level is that you don't have to care about whether students are or whether all the students actually care about the material. You're not actually the purpose is really just to give everyone a grade, and those who actually care about learning the opportunity to learn, and you can kind of throw in the towel for the rest. That said, I do try to allow everyone to make it easier to learn than it is not to learn. There are math classes where you don't get to use a calculator. I think that, and this is what I do in my classes, like there's lots more opportunity for manual writing. Really just so annoying if you have to ask ChatGPT and then write down the whole damn thing. People aren't going to do that. It just takes too long. I haven't done it on full like composition essays in class, but that's how English classes used to be. They still can be like that.
Okay, I can move us on to another question. Erica, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to point out Deborah's earlier comment too about this kind of focus on grades. This is something I've noticed, especially since coming to the University of Washington, because they operate on a system that I had honestly never seen before, which is capacity constrained majors, which essentially means that most of my undergraduate students who are freshmen or sophomores are not, they're accepted to the university, of course, but they haven't been accepted to their major yet. So they essentially, if I have them their freshman or sophomore year, they really, 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 really want an A like more than anything else. Because when they're applying to their major, and some of the majors are, from what I hear, really, really competitive, computer science in particular, aeronautics, and it's not airplane engineer, aerospace engineering. I know I've heard are very competitive, as well as ones like public health, global health, community health. So this is something that I've struggled with because, of course, I want all of my students to do well, but figuring out ways to assess student performance is something that I think is so difficult. And there are so many recommendations out there about different grading schemas that you can try. There's contract-based grading, there's all other kinds of like fill in the blank hyphen-based grading. So I was wondering if any of you all had thoughts about that as well.
Thanks, Erica, for making that connection. So this is something that I think can be really great in response rather than going, I've heard some people talk about the medieval route in response to ChatGPT of nope, everything's handwritten in class, no laptops in class, those sorts of things. Another route is, I think, to build in a lot more of the motivations scaffolded into individual assignments to try and help students see the value of them at each step. So here's why I'm having you do a reading response, not just to prove that you did the reading, but for more reasons than that sort of thing. But in addition to building in sort of positive motivating factors, rethinking the role of grades not can be a big benefit here and has needed a reckoning for a while. But with ChatGPT, there are now so many ways that the problems with grading systems are much more apparent, and students are much more motivated by grades than ever. So I have moved to full ungrading, but as Erica said, there are a lot of different forms of alternative grading, and we can sort of scaffold them. But in general, I think there are ways at any level where you can have students think about, write about what they think they're supposed to be getting out of that class throughout the term, having them, when they write an essay for a class, say, okay, here's what I would give myself as a grade, and here's why. And having sort of portfolio-based grading, things like that, can be not quite as labor intensive as full ungrading, but still get some of the metacognitive work built in for students to take ownership for their work and really have to think about why it is that they're learning. And I think a lot of that can help change some of those the motivations in place for students to use ChatGPT. And I had 50 students, all very focused on grades in classes last semester. And I did the sort of ungrading process and had a lot of the metacognitive self-reflections throughout the term, had them write a reflection of what they think grades are supposed to be, what they think that I wanted them to get out of the class, what they wanted to get out of the class, those sorts of things. And then I had them write what grade they should get and to give an argument for that grade based on the work that they'd done all semester. And I only had one student out of 50 use ChatGPT for also writing that reflection, so that wasn't too great, but at least they committed. But I think 1 out of 50 is pretty good odds, and much better than I've seen other folks who are trying to outsmart the students or just try and go the medieval route, things like that.
I feel like I totally agree with what you're saying, Cassie. I think that you're pillaring my position too much by calling it the medieval route. There's a time and a place to use a variety of approaches, but at the end of the day, you want it to be fun. Like, it should be more interesting, and the way that you make learning more interesting than not learning is often just by making it more fun, which I take to be the equivalent to what you're saying.
It's interesting listening to what we both just said and thinking about the question Deborah asked. I'm wondering if you think that the growth of AI is pushing us, educators, to rethink how we evaluate students. Because when we say, students don't value learning, I wonder if it's that they don't value learning or they don't value school. And because school doesn't work for them for whatever reason, and the way school structure doesn't work for them. And so I'm just wondering if AI is an opportunity for us to think differently about the way in which education is structured generally. I'm curious what you all think.
This is very clear in computer science education, where in teaching introductory computer science classes, oftentimes there's like a set list of programming assignments, more or less, and you assume that students are just going to do them. It's a little similar to math classes in which you have just like standard problems, although usually you change the numbers in math classes to a greater degree. And this is just like so easy to do with ChatGPT. So there's some stuff changing in terms of how introductory computer science classes, which is good. I think it's making it make classes more interesting. A lot more project-based classes are coming out of that. There are other challenges in terms of grading those. Anyway.
Yeah, I think I was just about to type this in the chat, but I might as well say it aloud instead. I feel like one of the beauties of philosophy courses is that we often do get some leeway, right, with what we teach. Of course, there are exceptions, like, if I'm teaching an intro to logic class, I'm not going to dive in with like my favorite models of disability or something. But with most other philosophy classes, we get, I think, enough like syllabus freedom that we can kind of tailor it to things that we think students will be interested in, or to uh, uh, topics that students are studying. But then the flip side of that, of course, is that if you're an instructor and you want to, really tailor your course to each class, each group of students that you have each quarter, that takes a whole lot of work. um, I've been, kind of going back and forth in my mind right now about whether for my class that I'm teaching this summer, I want to use the syllabus I used last summer, maybe tweak a couple things that I wasn't, that I didn't get really great reception from students on, or if I want to just, tear it to the ground, build up an entirely new course. So I think that there is kind of this like unseen and often I think undervalued side of instructors' labor, both in universities and in K-12 settings, where, in addition to knowing your stuff, or a big part of knowing your stuff involves or entails knowing how it changes over time, and knowing kind of what is like the new thing. There's also, if anybody is interested in thinking about like how kids learn and how instructors kind of need to be responsive to the ways that kids learn, I recently finished listening to the podcast Sold a Story, which is about like teaching kids how to read, and the kind of erasure of phonics education and now the like rebuilding of phonics education, because as it turns out, kids were not learning how to read. And it's really, really interesting. Available on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm going to turn, Carl asked a question which is sort of very much related to what we've been talking about, and I'm curious to hear what you all think. And Chloe, I'm curious to hear what you think in particular too. So the question is, do you have particular strategies? And I guess for Chloe, I would say, can you think that there might be particular strategies for motivating students who are taking the class, not because they're interested in it, but because they have to, because they need it for a requirement? And Carl says not all of his students share Chloe's commitment to inquiry. So I'm just curious what are some strategies for, especially given the option of using ChatGPT for motivating and reaching those students.
For me, I feel like I've been most motivated on assignments that, like, to be honest, probably group assignments where we have to like collectively work with other students on one particular part, because I feel like because there's so much still like, I don't know, there's, at least in my school, there's like competition in the English class of like, oh, who can contribute the most, or like who can come up with the best argument. Everyone kind of builds off of each other, and then that way we're all kind of motivated to do the best we can. I also think that if it's a poem or a book that we've gone over in class that everyone has had time to actually read and understand, people are more willing to talk and write about what prompt is given. Yeah, for me, those have been the ones that have been fun.
Also, some strategies that I've been using sort of in the spirit of transparent alignment and being really open with students about my intentions and also trying to be really responsive to their existing interests. I'll ask at the beginning of classes of the semester for every single student to say, why are they interested in, or why are they taking this class? And then for those students who say it's a requirement, so it's a gen ed requirement, something like that, then I'll say, okay, why? Why are you feeling that? And they say, well, because I'm majoring in this. Okay, why are you doing that? And the why until they get to the point where they're saying, well, because I need a degree to get a job and I want a job so that I can, if one could say he wants a boat, because like his life will be better. He'll have a good life if he can have a boat. But get to the point where they do care about things. Maybe they haven't made explicit what they care about before, but finding out what the students care about fundamentally usually comes down to some version of they want to be a good person, or they think that that's how life is supposed to be, or that's what they want life to be. That then there's sort of a common ground of, okay, I know that most of these students generally want to live well and they're trying to figure that out. But then on the day-to-day throughout the semester, and even I've been doing this with my middle schoolers, I use a lot of virtue language. So skills-based language is pretty common. It's like, yeah, this helps you learn how to think critically or to analyze arguments, things like that. But the virtue language allows for, I think, builds in the motivations already. Say like, hey, student, you want to be a good communicator, right? You want to be able to think well, or to be curious, or to be open-minded. I think that these are important things to be as a person in the world. Cool. Okay, let's practice those through doing philosophy or through reading this or talking about any of this. Jason Bear has a really excellent book, Deep in Thought, that is a practical guide to teaching and uses virtues in framing classroom discussions and framing class structures. And I found that that's worked really well, even for things like symbolic logic with middle schoolers and with college kids, where they're like, this is weird. How am I ever going to use this? Truth tables are weird. This is so abstract. But then when I talk about it in terms of paying attention to details, or clearly communicating ideas, recognizing assumptions, all these sorts of features that, like, just describing it in those ways, they go, oh, okay, yeah, I could see how that would be valuable. And there's a nice metaphor of like in Kung Fu movies, the kid always, has to practice these bizarre moves that he's always asking, when do I get to learn Kung Fu though? When do I actually start learning that? And then it always turns out that he needed to trust the Kung Fu master, because then he ends up winning the tournament just from, waxing on and waxing off. So I think that you can even tell students that it may seem weird and disconnected and bizarre, but trust me as the instructor, we'll get you there. And then as instructors, we should be better than the Kung Fu masters by actually communicating throughout how each of these practices and each of these assignments and readings and content sections are actually connecting to these goals that we have, and how it can fit into the students' development as human beings in the world more broadly.
Carl asked a kind of a practical follow-up, I think geared towards you, Chloe, in particular. He asks, do you find that shorter readings more easily enable you and your colleagues to participate? Does that make a difference?
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely. I think it's not like it's nice, especially if we go over them in class, it's nice to make sure that everyone has, read it, which, some people don't do, but if they know, and then it makes for just better conversations. Also, I think the shorter poems are at least in my opinion, they're a bit harder to understand. My class recently went over this one poem. I forget the name, but someone like took a plum and then ate a plum, and it was like one stanza and it was 7 lines. I forget the name, but it was so short and it was really confusing. But I feel like since everyone was confused together, it was really nice to talk about what everyone thought it meant. And by the end of class, we were able to come up with the, oh yeah, the So Sweet and So Cold poem. Yes, that one. I don't really know what it means, but it was nice talking to other people who knew what it meant.
Thanks, Chloe. Another question that's sort of on a different topic that came up a little while ago was about consciousness. And what does it mean to be conscious? AI can AI be conscious? What would that look like? Rosario says AI has another way to process things. So we could think about this more and try to understand what it means to be conscious. So be curious to hear what any of you have to say.
There are so many different distinctions. You know, you could take a dualist stance to imagine that there are two sorts of stuff which make up the world, like Descartes did. And you might draw a particular distinction based on that. Even in a materialist or a physicalist stance, there's just like a monadistic. There's one kind of stuff that makes up the world. It's material things. You still might not think that AI is conscious. You might take a position that you need to fulfill a certain kind of function. Analog clocks and digital clocks both tell time. The function is the reporting of time, that kind of keeping track of increments. Is consciousness like telling time? Does it require having this kind of function? At what level is that function necessary? Do you need to do it like all the way up and down the chain from cellular machinery all the way up to like large neural architecture? Can it happen just informationally? Is it okay if you instantiate like a deterministic grid world, like Conway's Game of Life on a computer? There have been people that have had positions on all of these things. I don't think that current AI is conscious or has any likelihood of being conscious soon. I could get into that, but happy to hear from other folks. I'm not opposed to AI at one point being conscious. I think aliens could be conscious, would be my retort along those lines.
I'm still stuck on whether we can know other people are conscious. So I don't know the fuzziest idea about what consciousness can or can't look like outside of that. Like, yes, I believe that you all are conscious, and I think there are good reasons to think it, but still not sure about that whole problem of other minds thing.
Eric Eric Kenyon asks, Chloe, you talk about being confused together. I wonder if this is one of AI's blind spot. It does well sounding like an expert, but philosophy has been connected to perplexity and wonder from the get-go. So where's ChatGPT on that? He wants to see what he can get ChatGPT to come up with.
Yeah, there's this like beautiful thing that happens in philosophy classes where students try things out in ways that they might not be willing to try things out if they're, in a math class or something like that. I always love when, a student kind of prefaces a thought by saying, I haven't fully thought this through, or I'm not really sure if this is going to work, but let's try anyway, and let's see where that takes us. And it seems like the ability to do that might be something that AI either lacks or it just doesn't do in the same way that we do.
Yeah, we talk in philosophy about developing a comfort with uncertainty. And it seems like it's hard to imagine Chat GPT developing a comfort with uncertainty. It seems really quite contradictory to its very existence.
I don't know. I guess I would push back. I think that the most uncertain thing that you could imagine would be something that always abstains from answering or claims uncertainty. It's not a very interesting kind of uncertainty, but it is nonetheless a kind of uncertainty. I think probably the issue with AI systems is a lack of a kind of agent. Most AI systems can be thought, Alison Gopnik uses the term as cultural technologies, a kind of superposition of a variety of beliefs, more like prediction engines, like Mad Libs to a much, much higher order degree. When you're engaging in a philosophical discussion, you need to imagine what your interlocutor is thinking. And this might go by the name of theory of mind, social reasoning, social thinking, a variety of capacities that humans engage with each other along. There are some capacities that AI systems have along these lines, but it's fractured space. I see no fundamental gap here, but happy to discuss that.
When you say fractured space, can you say what do you mean by
Oh,
that?
like there are a variety. There are some people. Sometimes artificial intelligence is best thought of as alien intelligence because they are not abiding by the same kind of constraints that humans do. They don't go through the same developmental milestones. The evolutionary selection mechanisms which led to the establishment of reason are not those that led to the ability to use words in an AI system. And so while they can play chess or talk about things that are very commonly talked about online and that therefore appear to be quite intelligent, I was just reading an email recently, can't play Wordle well. Probably the reason for that is that Wordle's training data wouldn't have actually fed into during the time span for the last version of ChatGPT. They're bad at very high order multiplication, large language models at least. They might be good at some kinds of social tasks. Some colleagues of mine here have worked on basically turning making causal graphs to describe social interactions and attempting to change various actions or negate them and be able to detect the degree to which a LLM can answer it correctly, like the Sally Ann test given to kids. If you put a toy in a basket, when a third person, Jim, we'll call him, is in the room, and then you move the toy to a different basket, and Jim comes back into the room, and you ask the kid, "Where's the thing?" This is an object permanence task, but this also has to do with like detecting the mental state of the other person. So that would be the kind of test, but of a different order. That's what I mean by fractured.
Thank you.
Quickly kind of bringing back, Jenna, to your point, also to connecting it with creativity, seems like the biggest thing is that ChatGPT and other forms of AI are all about output. They're all about the final result, and philosophy is about the process, and it's not just about getting truth or getting knowledge. It's about aiming for knowledge. It's about wondering. Creativity isn't about the creation, it's about the process. So there's a nice kind of contrast there, that it can give you something that looks like philosophy, but it can't philosophize kind of without the agency dimensions of it. And that's something students can do, and shifting away from an emphasis on output to that process, I think is good for everyone involved.
Yeah, it seems like it's also about, and this is sort of what I meant by comfort with uncertainty, about being more question-centered than answer-centered. And that, of course, is what philosophy is all about, and probably a very good place to end the webinar since we're just about out of time. I do want to thank everyone for coming. As I think many of you know, Plato puts on lots of free online events for educators. I'm actually going to put in the chat a link to our schedule for our winter and spring events, including a number of roundtables that are sort of more on the introduction to various fields in philosophy, which some of you might be interested in. So do check that out. And I want to thank our panelists for coming this evening and for the really interesting presentations and conversation that I'm sure will lead all of us to keep thinking about a lot of these questions. So really appreciate all of you spending your time with us. Thanks everyone for coming, and I hope you all have a great rest of the evening.